Stephen Christopher Stanko was executed on June 13, 2025, at the Broad River Maximum Security Prison in South Carolina. He was 57 years old. He died by lethal injection after nearly 2 decades on death row. He had personally requested that method. He chose the needle over the firing squad or the electric chair. No court stopped his execution. No international body intervened. The evil, the madness with which he committed his crimes has come to an end. Justice has been served, or at least that's what many believe. Today, South Carolina closed one of the darkest and most disturbing cases in its recent history. One night, 3 victims, an execution foretold. Like and subscribe to Final Sentence Documentaries on Capital Punishment. Stephen Christopher Stanko committed 3 unthinkably cruel crimes. He was born on January 13, 1968, at the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base in Cuba, where his father was serving in the military. He spent most of his childhood moving from city to city across the United States, following his family's relocations. From a young age, he stood out for his intelligence. He read compulsively, spoke eloquently, and didn't appear to be a criminal at first glance. But beneath that cultured facade was an obsession with control, a complete lack of empathy, and a past already stained. In 1996, he was convicted of kidnapping and assault with a weapon. He spent 8 years behind bars. During that time, he wrote a book about prison life, not as a social critique, but as if it were an academic essay. He presented himself as a co-author, trying to show he had changed. He was released in 2004. 1 year later, he would commit the crimes that would land him on death row. And this time, there was no turning back. Laura Ling, 43, was a librarian in Horry County, South Carolina. That's where she met Stephen Stanko. He introduced himself as a reformed man, cultured, even intriguing. He sold himself as a writer, a remorseful ex-convict, and a published author with a book about his time in prison. Laura didn't know him deeply, but she decided to give him a chance. First as a friend, then something more. She let him into her home, gave him a place to stay. They had been living together for weeks. Also living in the house was Laura's teenage daughter. The young girl didn't just witness what happened that night, she was also a victim. She was attacked viciously and survived by sheer miracle. April 7, 2005, Horry County, South Carolina. That night, Laura Ling's house seemed calm. Her teenage daughter was in her room, Laura was resting in the living room, and Stephen Stanko, the man they both trusted, was also there. Shortly after 10 p.m., everything changed. Stanko attacked her without warning in a brutal way. He overpowered her physically and ended her life within minutes before anyone could intervene. Then he went to the daughter's room. He subdued her with violence and assaulted her. With a knife, he caused a severe injury to her neck and left her there, thinking she wouldn't survive, thinking she was already dying. But that didn't happen. The young girl survived, and she remembered every detail. Stanko fled using Laura's vehicle. He took cash, some belongings, and drove south. He didn't hide. He didn't turn himself in. He chose to keep going. Her daughter, seriously injured, managed to crawl to a phone and dial 911. She could barely speak, but she said the essential: who had attacked her, where they were, and what had happened. Listening to the recordings is chilling.
How old are you?
15. I tried to put up a fight. I tried. I really did.
Did you see her, did it?
Yeah. With my mom's boyfriend.
The scene was clear. There was no messy robbery. It didn't look like an impulsive crime. It was selective, calculated. And the most disturbing part, the attacker was someone close, someone who had earned their trust. Officers issued an immediate search alert. Stanko already had a criminal record, and his profile came up quickly in the system. While authorities tried to locate him, Stanko, that same night, arrived in Georgetown County. There, he showed up at the home of Henry Lee Turner, a 74-year-old man who had generously welcomed him after his release from prison to help him at that time. Stanko made up a story, told him his father had died, said he needed comfort, and Turner moved, let him in. Minutes later, he attacked him. He used a firearm and muffled the shot with a pillow. He left no witnesses. He ended his life as if it meant nothing. Then he stole his car, his documents, his money, and vanished again. 2 people were dead. A young girl lived to tell it all, and the attacker once again disappeared like nothing had happened. Authorities had all the necessary information. They had already visited the crime scene at Laura's house, and now it was a matter of waiting for updates, since Stanko was driving the vehicle of one of his victims. Hours later, he was caught on traffic cameras, and agents traced his likely route toward the coast, but they immediately received another call. A neighbor reported the gunshot at Henry Turner's house. When police arrived, they found his body inside the home with no signs of struggle. The pattern was similar, precise, cold, clean. And the attacker, once again, was Stanko. The manhunt gained momentum. Helicopters, roadblocks, statewide alert. Local media started covering the case, and the faces of the victims began to appear in the news. Finally, on April the 12th, 2005, after several days on the run, Stephen Stanko was arrested without resistance in Augusta, Georgia. He had used Turner's name to check into a hotel. He was detained with stolen money, forged documents, and showed no remorse. During interrogation, he didn't deny anything. He spoke calmly. He even justified his actions as if they were part of an inevitable plan. He wasn't just a fugitive. He was someone who had crossed a line, fully aware of what he was doing. Stephen Stanko's trial began in 2006, 1 year after his arrest. The state of South Carolina decided to charge him separately for each of the 2 crimes. First, he would face charges for the death of Laura Ling and the attack on her daughter, then for the murder of Henry Turner. During the trial, the prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: DNA, fingerprints, testimonies, and a digital trail of his movements. The statement from Laura's daughter was key. Despite the trauma, she was able to clearly recount what had happened. Her testimony, emotional and harrowing, left the jury speechless. Stanko's attorneys tried to argue that he suffered from mental disorders and should be sent to a psychiatric facility instead of death row. They claimed his behavior was due to a supposed disconnection from reality, worsened by years of imprisonment and social rejection. But the prosecution was clear. Stanko knew what he was doing. He planned it, manipulated, chose his victims, and fled. There was no sign of confusion, no mistake, only determination. The jury reached a decision quickly. In 2006, Stephen Stanko was found guilty and sentenced to death for the murder of Laura Ling. Later, he would receive a second death sentence for the killing of Henry Turner. The media covered the case intensely. It was a crime with all the ingredients of horror: betrayal, a double life, intelligence used for harm. Public opinion didn't hesitate. Many demanded exemplary justice. Others simply couldn't believe that someone like him had deceived so many people for so long. Stanko filed several appeals. His defense argued that he hadn't received a fair trial, that the media influenced the jury, that his psychiatric issues weren't taken into account. But every higher court upheld the conviction. His fate was sealed. After his sentencing, Stephen Stanko was transferred to death row at the Broad River Maximum Security Prison in South Carolina. He spent nearly 2 decades there. 20 years in an isolation cell surrounded by concrete, with only a bed, a toilet, and a food tray sliding through a metal slot. Time didn't pass the same for him. He measured it in appeals, denials, and silence. During those years, he wrote various texts from prison. Some made their way into academic forums where he still had contacts. He wrote about justice, punishment, and philosophy. He never admitted guilt. He never expressed remorse. Sometimes he seemed convinced of his innocence. Other times, he simply didn't speak about it. There's no record of him receiving regular visits. His presence was almost invisible to the media during the last decade. He was no longer the cultured killer that once provoked morbid curiosity. Just another name on the waiting list. His disciplinary record shows no major incidents. He didn't take part in rehabilitation programs either. He maintained a cold, methodical, almost robotic routine. No scandals, no confessions, no redemption. His execution date was postponed several times. His lawyers exhausted every possible option. But the state was clear. Justice, though delayed, would not be denied. The date was set, June 13, 2025. The location: Broad River Correctional Institution in South Carolina. Stephen Stanko had spent more than 19 years waiting for this moment. No sentence reductions, no commutations, only time, silence, and a growing file on his back. That morning, he was transferred from his cell to the execution area. The protocol was standard: medical check, final instructions, and the opportunity to give a last statement. His last words were full of remorse. During his final statement, Stephen Stanko expressed regret, asked not to be judged only by his worst moment, addressed the families of the victims, and apologized for what happened. He did not request a special last meal, or at least there is no public record indicating he did. His execution was carried out by lethal injection, witnessed by legal representatives, prison staff, and accredited observers. No cameras, no major protests, no redemption. A life marked by violence, manipulation, and emotional emptiness ended in a silent room. An execution that, for many, closed a chapter. For others, it only opened new questions. I'd appreciate it if you subscribed to the channel and gave the video a like. Now let's go over the upcoming scheduled executions. Thomas Lee Gudinas, May 23, 1994. Orlando, Florida. A humid, silent dawn. The city center was beginning to empty out. Michelle McGrath, 27, was leaving Barbarella's around 2:45 a.m. She was walking alone to her car. She never made it. At 7:30 a.m., her body was found in an alley next to a school. She was lifeless, showing clear signs of extreme violence and intimate assault. The scene was brutal. That same night, another woman, Rochelle Smith, had been followed by a man to her car. She managed to lock herself inside and escape. Later, she identified Thomas Lee Gudinas as her attacker. Gudinas had been at the same bar as Michelle. His friends testified that they lost track of him before closing. A school employee saw a man fleeing the alley where the body was later found. It was Gudinas. The evidence was overwhelming: fingerprints on Michelle's vehicle, biological traces on her body, and confessions to his roommates. One of them stated Gudinas had said, "I killed her," and then. He never finished the sentence. He didn't need to. In 1995, he was convicted of first-degree murder, 2 counts of sexual assault, attempted sexual assault, and armed robbery. The sentence: death. After nearly 30 years on death row, Governor Ron DeSantis signed his death warrant. It is scheduled for June 24, 2025 at 6 p.m. at Florida State Prison in Stark. It will be Florida's 7th execution this year. All have been by lethal injection, a crime that shook Orlando in the 90s, a sentence that, after decades, is finally about to be carried out. Richard Gerald Jordan, January 14, 1976, Gulfport, Mississippi. A mild morning, gray skies. In a house in the Woodland Hills neighborhood, Edwina Martyr, 37, was home alone. She was the wife of a local businessman, a mother, a homemaker. That morning, someone knocked on the door claiming to be from a utility company. She didn't hesitate to open it, but the man wasn't there to check anything. His name was Richard Gerald Jordan. He was 29. What seemed like an ordinary visit turned into the darkest moment of Edwina's life. Jordan pulled out a gun and forced her into her own car. He drove her outside the city, into a wooded area in Harrison County. He made her walk among the trees. Then he executed her with a single gunshot. After that, he called Edwina's husband, pretended she was still alive, demanded a ransom of $25,000. He planned to pick up the money at a gas station, but the police were already waiting for him. He was arrested the same day. He confessed without hesitation, said he had picked the family at random, just looking for someone who looked wealthy, said it had all been planned from the start, that he never intended to leave any witnesses. In March 1976, he was sentenced to death, but his case became a legal spiral that would last decades. Appeals, overturned verdicts, new trials, motions, delays. He was sentenced to death at least 4 times for the same crime. Now, at 78 years old, Richard Gerald Jordan is the longest-serving death row inmate in Mississippi. He has spent nearly half a century awaiting execution. On June 25, 2025, the state is finally set to carry it out. Capital punishment is scheduled for that day. Mississippi allows multiple execution methods: lethal injection, nitrogen hypoxia, electric chair, or firing squad. I know some might wonder, can't they use all of them?
Execution date has been set for Mississippi's longest tenured death row inmate. 78-year-old Richard Gerald Jordan has been selected to death in 4 different trials for the Harrison County kidnapping and murder of Edwina Martyr in 1976.
Jordan has until June 10th to choose. Now, let's look beyond June. What other executions are scheduled for 2025? Byron Black. Execution scheduled for August 5th, 2025. In 1989, Byron Black, along with accomplices, broke into a family's house in Memphis, Tennessee. During the robbery, Black killed Angela Clay and her 2 daughters. The crime was especially violent, and Black was arrested after a long police pursuit. He was sentenced to death in 1990. The execution is scheduled for August 5, 2025, at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution, where he can choose between lethal injection or the electric chair. Timothy L. Coleman. Execution scheduled for October 30, 2025. On March 23, 1996, Timothy L. Coleman killed Melinda Stevens, a woman who had been a confidential informant for the police in Springfield, Ohio. He killed her in her home to stop her from continuing to provide information to authorities. He was arrested shortly after the crime, and during his trial it was revealed that Coleman had a history of violence. He was sentenced to death in 1997, and his execution is scheduled for October 30, 2025, at Southern Ohio Correctional Facility via lethal injection. Kareem M. Jackson. Execution scheduled for December 10, 2025. In 1995, Kareem M. Jackson and his accomplice killed Antonio Hunter and Terrence Walker during a robbery attempt in Franklin, Ohio. Jackson, in an impulsive attack, shot both victims, leaving them dead at the scene. He was arrested shortly after and sentenced to death in 1996. The execution is scheduled for December 10, 2025, at Southern Ohio Correctional Facility via lethal injection. Harold Wayne Nichols. Execution scheduled for December 11, 2025. On November 15, 1988, Harold Wayne Nichols murdered Karen Pulley, a 43-year-old woman in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Nichols, who had planned the robbery, attacked her brutally and killed her in her own home. He was arrested days after the crime. He was sentenced to death in 1990, and his execution is scheduled for December 11, 2025, at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution via lethal injection or the electric chair, at the inmate's choice. Quizzy Bryan. Execution scheduled for January 7, 2026. In 1999, Quizzy Bryan, during a robbery, murdered Carla Morris, a 42-year-old white woman. Bryan, in his attempt to rob her, brutally attacked her in her home in Ohio. He beat her and strangled her, leaving her dead on the floor. When police investigated the crime, they found physical evidence linking him to the scene. He was arrested shortly after the murder. In trial, Bryan was sentenced to death in 2001. The execution is scheduled for January 7, 2026, at Southern Ohio Correctional Facility, and will be carried out via lethal injection. And now a brief recap of executions already carried out in 2025, as of today. And tell me, is there any case you'd like to know more about? Ted Bundy, Aileen Wuornos, the Menendez brothers? Let me know in the comments. What's the most shocking or memorable criminal case you've ever heard of? If you enjoy this kind of content, please like the video, leave a comment, and most importantly, subscribe to Final Sentence. Accept no imitations.